Uhuru na nguvu.
No. You looking at a free black man.
Talk Black 360.
You want to know what a free black man look like? Look at me.
Uhuru na nguvu. Welcome to another dose of Talk Black 360. I'm your host, Tino Blaine King, the Koure and Kush, the pioneer of Black pragmatism. I'm very excited for our third dose of Talk Black 360. Today, I've got a lot of information to share with you in a very short period of time. So let's jump right into it. Today's discussion is going to be about our position in America and on the globe. Specifically, the title of today's discussion is going to be "We Are Not the Same as African Americans." Now, before you get all in an uproar about that title, and I know we love our titles, we've got a process that I've got to walk you through today in order to make this case that we are not the same as African Americans. Some of you right off the bat is going to know exactly what I'm talking about, but I'm definitely going to be digging into this. I've got a lot of input for you, so here we go.
That's one. That's America. What is America? Our people. But unless you're blessed to be a Native American, which is a blessing to you and to all who know you, we are a nation of immigrants. Don't take it from me, take it from Ronald Reagan. You've seen Ronald Reagan's, this is the last speech I will make as President of the United States. The last speech, does that get your attention? Ronald Reagan, the last speech as President, and I want to communicate a message to a country I love. And in essence, look it up on Google, it's so beautiful. Or wherever you look things up. It's so beautiful. The vital force of America's preeminence in the world is every new generation of immigrants who come to America. And when America fails to recognize that, America will fail to be preeminent in the world. We cannot close the door to the vitality of our future Ronald Reagan. It's better than, it's more poetic than that. It's longer, too.
Okay, all right. So I know that probably just slipped by you, but I want to make sure that you understand what you just heard. So we're talking about the context of, or she was talking about the context of what was America and who was America. And she stated about America is the people. And in the groups inside of the country, she titled two groups. One group was Native Americans, which she said, God bless them, because obviously they know what they did to the Native Americans, all but wiped them off of the face of the earth. But more importantly, the second distinction that she made of Americans was immigrants. And you've heard them say that, time and time again, that America is a nation of immigrants. Here's the problem. Where in those two groups would Black people fit? Because we're not immigrants. And, contrary to some, rising belief, we're not Native Americans. So if you're saying that America is comprised of two groups, then we don't fit into either of those categories. What is actually happening to the Black man, woman, and child in America? And that's why we're going to have this conversation today, because I'll tell you what's happening. We are going through a process of assimilation. Even after all that they've done to take away our identity through slavery and all of those things, we're still going through a process of assimilation. So let's keep walking this down. And before we go too deep into that, I want to play this other clip just for you to put in the back of your mind as we continue this discussion going forward. Listen.
But I was concerned, just in terms of being global, that the president said, I have to get off the phone now because I'm going to go speak at the United Nations. And it's great. Everything's great here. It's great. So I didn't have a chance to listen to his speech. I was too busy so that I could have time to come here. But he said, that he called upon the countries to reject globalism and embrace nationalism. Really?
Huh. Interesting. So keep that in the back of your minds. So the president, the guy that, most black people despise, made a statement at the United Nations that he's calling on the world to reject globalism and embrace nationalism. Now, we're going to get into that in just a few minutes, but just keep that part in the back of your mind. Let's get back on this concept of immigrants and natives, and we don't fall into either of those categories. So let's look at what one of our dear brothers, Dr. Amos Wilson, had to say about this scenario some time ago. All right, let's take a listen.
You know what I can't understand? God sat around here and made all of these different ethnic groups, and then we make it holy to ignore it all. You know, really. You know, to me it's a type of blasphemy. You know, you made all these colors, but well, let's forget about all of this. Identity is based on some degree of what? Similarity. Individual interests are protected by social organization. And on some level, some group, even if they're within the same ethnic group, finds some basis for similarity and some basis on which to organize as a group to protect their interests.
Woo! All right. We're getting there. Okay, so now, where we've got to pay attention very closely is we're talking about the value of assimilation versus the value of maintaining your identity. And of course, there's different concepts of assimilation. Let's be specific. What we're talking about specifically is cultural assimilation. Why cultural assimilation? Because in society, we are a component of a societal culture that we have to make sure that, as Dr. Amos said, we have to make sure that we're drawing similarities in order to protect ourselves, right? But the concept that we're being led into is a global society where everyone becomes one unit. And it's crazy because I often talk to people, and it's very interesting when I'm talking to our folk, and the conversation comes up about something particular that black people do. And it's almost always, I'll get the response, someone will say, but black people are not a monolith. And of course they aren't. But we must understand that it is human nature for us to be drawn together by our similarities. So remember, if we go into the concept of globalism, which continues to pile into the society an uncountable and unmeasurable amount of cultures, and the desire to assimilate all of these different cultures into one culture, who do you think is going to lose their identity? Is it going to be America, or is it going to be those subcultures that move in? And that's a whole nother conversation, because we could have a longer conversation about what integration did for black people, but we're not there. So here we are. We're talking about the concept of assimilating into America, calling ourselves African Americans, when in fact, most of us, if any, have never been to Africa. And the Africa that our ancestors left is no longer the same Africa. So the term African American, although we embrace it, does us an injustice, because it is the particular manner in which the system uses its power to diminish our identity. So why is that an issue? And this next clip that I want to play for you is very, very, very instrumental, because we're talking about a brother who's very well traveled, and he does put some inclination of religion into the context of this conversation. So this next clip I want you to listen to, Brother Khalid Muhammad, who was speaking about his pilgrimage to Mecca. Let's listen.
I did not find what Malcolm found. I have been 7 times, and I found racism among the white Arabs in Mecca so thick until you could cut it with a damn knife. I found ghettos in Mecca. I found that no matter where I went in the world, I found that no matter what the social, political, religious, economic, academic system was, it made no difference. Wherever the black-white dynamic existed, you'll find the white on top, the black on the bottom. I've been to capitalist countries as we are victims of white capitalism, and wherever the black-white dynamic exists, you find the white capitalists on top and the black capitalists on the bottom. If it's a socialist country, you find the white socialists on top and the black socialists on the bottom. If it's a communist country, you find the white communists on top and the black communists on the bottom. If it's a Christian country, you find the white Christian on top and the black Christian on the bottom. If it's a so-called Jew country, you find the white Jew on top and the black Jew on the bottom. Yes, I've been to Mecca, and where the black-white dynamic exists, you find the white Muslim on top, and God damn it, you find the black Muslim on the bottom.
Man, you know, you have to love the passion of Brother Khalid. You know, God bless the dead, I guess, if you are a believer. But I want us to understand something, that in this process of assimilation, and with all of these political leaders talking about globalization, and if not just globalization, this multicultural concept of America and everyone being the same and equal, it's not a reality. And in the process of us looking for that reality, we are weakening our generations as we move further and further into the assimilation with America. And the funny thing is, you know, I've had several conversations with my historians and my political advisors who have vehemently suggested that we are completely and totally assimilated. And I tend to slightly disagree with that, but there's a lot of truth there. But nonetheless, however much assimilated we are, we have to keep in the forefront of our conversation the desire to be whole again, the desire to be a group of people who have or who has a culture that solves its problems and rewards its accomplishments. Because in fact, that is what culture does. So if we're in a process of living inside a society, but we're not particularly addressing through our process of living a way to solve our problems and award our accomplishments, then we may not exist much longer. So having said that, I think the next thing that I want to do is I want to take this time, you know, next couple minutes, and I want to show you some contrast, right? I want to give you some importance of why we should be resisting assimilation, why we should be developing our own culture and moving forward in our own independence. So I'm sure some of you have seen some of my posts with the last few weeks or so where they had the revolt summit. And if you remember correctly, Killer Mike was the voice that had kind of risen above a lot of the conversation in that summit. But I want you to listen in this next clip to what Killer Mike actually says in that summit that I think is very important. Take a look.
I'll tell you when America was great. 7 years after the ending of the Civil War.
Exactly what
Hold, Candace, because you didn't give the comment, so you weren't prepared for that one. No, but that's not to jump on Candace, because again, I'm disagreeing with my friend. 7 years after the end of Civil War, blacks within 7 to 15 years accumulated over 15 million acres of land. Hold on, before we get to clapping, because the niggas bought some shit. Black people were the only skilled labor in there. So if it was welding to be done, iron bending, cotton picking, it was black people. So instantly, your value became more.
All right. So we're definitely getting there. And I'm starting to bring you into the mindset of why it is so important that we identify the problems that we have as a people. And then we start to develop the processes to solve our problems independently from whatever the larger society is doing. When Brother Khalid talked about the black and white dynamic, I don't need to pull up the BSSDC in order to give you the statistics. If you're black in America, you understand this. At every level of society, we find ourselves on the bottom side of the black and white dynamic. What do I mean by that? I mean, when you leave your house, there's more likelihood that you'll be pulled over by the police and treated unjustly just for being black. You come into the world, so to speak, maybe after high school or coming out of college, and you realize that there's still a difference in a black man or woman seeking a job versus their white counterpart seeking or applying for the same job. When you get the job, the advancement inside of the company or inside of that industry is usually more difficult for the black as it is for, or more so than it is for the white counterpart. Some of that in part has to do with being the majority versus being the minority. However, that's a different conversation. What we do know is that there is more of an obstacle for advancement. You get married, you have children, you buy a house. When you buy a house, you still have to consider that in most cases, when you look at the black person in America, their mortgage rates tend to be higher than that of their white counterparts. Black people in America, first generation of any type of wealth, usually are going into the process of home buying with something, with something different than their white counterpart, not bringing to the table, any houses that the family may have had, or trading up. A lot of times the first home buyers are legitimately first home buyers, making a much more difficult situation for blacks. From everything from, the knowledge of investments and the opportunities and the doors that are open for you when you begin to make money and you try to improve your situation. It's just every facet of the American system is more difficult for the black than it is for their counterpart. That's not an excuse. It's a reality. And I do understand, even with that reality, the universal people that we always figure a way to make the situation better, and we always advance. But that's not to say that this country is going to be around forever. And with all of the investment that our people, our ancestors has made in this country, we are definitely not in the position that we're supposed to be in as an original inhabitant of this land. So let's continue to look at the dynamic of assimilation and how, as we assimilate, we begin to lose our African minds and begin to develop a more European mind. So the next two clips that I want to play for you, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at where our thought leaders and our politicians who are supposed to be representing us as black people, where their mindset is versus where their mindset should be. And I'm going to play these clips for you. These clips are to represent the mindset. I don't want, although it's difficult, I want you to try to not attach the clip and the information to the candidate, because in doing that, it brings up some other issues that I don't want us to have to contend with right now. What I want you to look at is the mindset and listen to the words and try, if you can, to separate them from the speaker. So let's go. The first clip that I'm going to play for you is the mindset that we begin to develop as African Americans. Let's take a look.
Do you support reparations for black people?
Well, listen, again, we had over 200 years of slavery. We had Jim Crow for almost a century. We had legalized discrimination and segregation, and now we have segregation and discrimination that is not legal but still exists and is a barrier to progress. We have disparities around housing. We have disparities around education. We have disparities around income. And we have to recognize that everybody did not start out on an equal footing in this country. And in particular, black people have not. And so we have got to recognize that and do something about that.
Okay. I paused that for a second because it's kind of a long clip, but I want you to listen. The first thing that she said kind of set the stage for a direction that she should have been going in. But I want you to look at the way the rest of this clip plays out, because it shows the conceptual thought process of a so-called African American.
And give folks a lift up. That's why, for example, I'm proposing the LIFT Act. Give people who are making $100,000 or less as a family a tax credit, which will benefit and uplift 60% of black families who are in poverty.
So by default, it affects black families, but there's not a particular policy for African Americans that you would explore.
But no, if you look at the reality of who will benefit from certain policies, when you take into account that they're not starting at the same place and they're not starting on equal footing, it will directly benefit black children, black families, black homeowners, because the disparities are so significant. So if we focus on the specific issues that have resulted in the greatest disparities, and we understand that that's part of why we're doing it. Listen, the reality also is this: any policy that will benefit black people will benefit all of society. Let's be clear about that. Let's really be clear about that. So I'm not going to sit here and say I'm going to do something that's only going to benefit black people. No.
Wow. Okay, remember now, we're walking down the road. Let's try to just think about the thought process there. This is the thought process of an African American. This is also the thought process of many of us who can't see outside of the construct of the way things are, the construct of the empowered society or the dominant culture in the society. So that's one mindset. So keeping that in mind, what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at this next clip and look at the alternative to how a similar question would be answered. By the way, they're talking about reparations. But let's look at how, I hope I'm not mispronouncing the name. I believe it's Marion Williamson. But excuse me, let's look at how she actually answers that question.
People heal when there's some deep truth telling. We need to recognize that when it comes to the economic gap between blacks and whites in America, it does come from a great injustice that has never been dealt with. That great injustice has had to do with the fact that there was 250 years of slavery, followed by another 100 years of domestic terrorism. What makes me qualified to say 200 to 500 billion dollars? I'll tell you what makes me qualified. If you did the math of the 40 acres and a mule, given that there was 4 to 5 million slaves at the end of the Civil War, there were 4 to 5, and they were all promised 40 acres and a mule for every family of 4. If you did the math today, it would be trillions of dollars. And I believe that anything less than $100 billion is an insult, and I believe that 200 to 500 billion is politically feasible today because so many Americans realize there is an injustice that continues to form a toxicity underneath the surface, an emotional turbulence that only reparations.
Thank you very much.
All right. So there's definitely a difference in the way that, or at least in the perspective of how that question is approached, what the thought process is behind that answer or behind those answers. And ultimately, you have to understand that those questions, or at least not the questions, but those answers in their process are going to produce not only a different mentality, but they're going to produce a largely different result. Now, I want to put out a disclosure before I play these next 2 clips or 3 clips. I think there's 3 more, and then we'll be concluding. Yeah, those 36 minutes went by pretty fast. Okay, but listen, I want to play a disclaimer. So after the Revolt Summit, I believe it was after the Revolt Summit, T.I. did an interview with, I think it's Alex Jones is the guy's name. And what was important about that interview was the context in which he made his argument about Donald Trump. Now, remember, I'm a pragmatist. And what I think is that we ought to be able to look at situations from a practical standpoint. That's pragmatism. T.I. represented himself in his argument the way that many of us do when we look at social, political, and political situations. And I think this is very dangerous, but it's very valid nonetheless because it's what we do. But I want you to listen to T.I. first, and we'll talk about that in a second, and then we'll play the last 2 clips. But take a listen.
Yeah, listen, let me tell you this. This is what I'm telling you. I don't know whether he is or isn't. I don't know what he is doing or isn't doing. And that isn't my problem with him. You know what I'm saying? My problem with him is the disregard and disrespect for black lives and all of the rhetoric that he spews that galvanizes.
What's an example?
The very fine people on both sides.
Oh, I'd love to elaborate on that.
Now, you can say what... Now, this is the thing. I can give you credit for being exceptionally smart and intelligent, or I can deal with you as though you are exceptionally dumb and unintelligent. But I can't hop back and forth and do both. So, a person who is exceptionally smart and intelligent, they would know saying something like that would lend itself to the opinion of adversity to the people who are the most oppressed and have been the most disenfranchised throughout American history. So you can't say, oh, well, he just said that and he didn't mean it that way, unless you want me to assume or expect him to be exceptionally dumb and unintelligent.
Interesting, right? Now, what I think about that is that T.I. is openly making his disagreement a personal issue. And I think when we engage society and when we engage our political positioning, we have to engage, or at least we should model our culture behind being productive. We have to sometimes look at setting our feelings aside so that we can accomplish what it is that we need to get accomplished. And I'm saying that because reluctantly, I want to play a couple of things that by the president, Donald Trump, that he said that presents a mindset that goes back to the original clip when Nancy Pelosi was talking about globalism. What the president is saying is globalism is bad for America. Nationalism is good for America because it allows America's interests to be put first. Follow me, please. Secondly, when you take that thought process and apply that to the so-called African American, the African American puts themselves in the same category as what Nancy Pelosi had mentioned when she spoke about we're a nation of immigrants. So they put themselves in the category with the other immigrants, but there's still a black and white dynamic that they refuse to acknowledge. And now you would understand why there are people out there who would erase America's history as if it benefits us, to not realize that the position that we are in the black and white dynamic is caused by something. We are living in the consequences of what took place before we were put in this position. And it would be to the advantage of the dominant culture in this society to have us to forget about that so that we could assume that the position that we're in is all our doing. And if we put our emotions aside, then we can begin to understand exactly what it is, regardless to how we receive the message, but how we think about the message, more importantly, to the effect of how it will produce the result that we need. So let's look at these last two clips. And I want you to pay very close attention to what the president says, because it's important. In his assumption, he is, you know what? I don't want to talk too much about it. Let me play the clips and then we'll talk about it. Here we go.
African Americans built this nation. You built this nation. You know, you're just starting to get real credit for that. Okay, I don't know if you know that. You're just starting to get, you built the nation. We all built it, but you were such a massive part of it. Bigger than you were given credit for. Does that make sense? Right?
Okay, so you see where we're going with this? Now, this is the problem. I'm getting short. Okay, we're still looking at a concept here that is not acknowledging the sacrifice that the African American has made, and it is what is not doing, even though it may be slightly acknowledging it, what it's not doing is providing a resolution. So let's look at this last clip really quick.
So we pledge in the honor of our great African American community to build a future where every American child can live in safety, dignity, liberty, and peace. As Americans, we all share the same dreams, the same hopes, and the same magnificent destiny. We are now and will forever be one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God.
Woo! Okay. I really need to dig into it. I'm out of time. I think you've got the gist of what I'm saying, but listen. So the African American mindset would allow that last statement made by Donald Trump to get you thinking in the context of being one of the society or being one with the society. But if the society is not particularly focused on our concerns and the need for us to preserve ourselves, especially in a society that demonstrates it cares less about us because of the color of our skin than other immigrants in this country or immigrants in this country, then what we need to begin to do is develop solutions for us. That's all I got today. It's been a fast show. I'm glad that I was able to get that information in there. And I'm not done, though. Tomorrow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start talking about the solution to this problem, because I know a lot of us want to know, okay, that sounds great, Tino, but what are we going to do about it? So tomorrow, our focus is going to be on building Black safe spaces so that we can develop our culture. We're also going to talk about building Black embassies so that we can bring our culture generations to come. And finally, we're going to develop our culture and begin to look at our problems specifically in these spaces and begin to solve those problems. Stay strong and stay Black. Ashe? This has been another dose of Talk Black 360.
No, no, no. You will never be enslaved again by no man.